Welcome again to the no, um, ooh, sorry about that. Uh, welcome again to the Fragments of Silicon review. Welcome to review three, Sin Slayers. Right, Sin Slayers is um, it bills itself as a JRPG roguelike experience. That's really not accurate, at least in terms of the JRPG. Um, Honestly, this game has much more of a Western RPG flavoring than a JRPG. I mean, maybe that's splitting hairs, but this game is definitely more falling into the classical, let's say, stylings of RPGs rather than JRPGs. That is to say, you know, you're not assuming the role of a character; you're assuming the role of a class more than anything else. Like the characters that you do play don't, they do have sprigs of personality, but I couldn't say that they were fully fledged characters. Like perhaps the most notable bit of characterization for each of the archetypes here is the sin that they attune to. Indeed, the sins that are being talked about in this game are, well, the seven deadly sins. Um, and your job is to literally rid the land of the physical embodiment of all these sins. You have to go and actually kill the sin of, say, envy and like the first sin you kill is gluttony, and so on and so forth. And let me see here. And this game takes place in some sort of mystical land that you're all trapped in by this mysterious bishop character, who's basically holding you hostage because I think you're all dead or something. Like, I don't know. Honestly, the plot isn't too important in this game, which is another thing that kind of tips it towards the Western RPG bent. Like, but anyway, there's a lot to cover in this game because the roguelike elements are basically the dungeons. They are randomized. And it's like, it's not that big of a deal, quite honestly. Like, the dungeons, well, it's one of those, the things are in different locations, but it's going to be like the same things over and over again, like the same quest, the same boss, that kind of deal. So, anyway, where the sins come into play in terms of gameplay is the sin meter. That it's like there are certain temptations that you encounter throughout each dungeon, such as a lot of desecration. It's like there's a lot of, hey, this grave is open, or this guy is dead. It's like, do you want to search the body? Do you want to, raid this tomb? It's like, do you want to search these bags? And if you say yes, you build up your sin meter. And the more you build up the sin meter, the more bad things happen. But if you abstain, or at least this game's interpretation of abstinence, which is basically leave shit alone. It's not even like, oh, hey, here's a corpse, let's bury it. It's just, leave it alone. Just let it rot in the sun. Like, I guess that, that isn't sin, but it's also, you're still leaving a body to be rotting in the fields. It's not exactly considered to be pious behavior, is what I'm saying. But I'll be honest, I didn't pay that much attention to the sin meter because it was honestly pretty easy to not want to rob tombs and the like. You know? Yeah, it's like other things, uh, and in terms of structure, it's fairly straightforward. In addition to your main quest to kill the 7 deadly sins here, you get a lot of side quests. It's like you got to find a hammer for the blacksmith. You've got to find um, a lot of the character classes that get unlocked are lost, literally lost in the woods or something like that. Mind you, that's the first part. I will say that unlocking the beyond base 4 characters that you get is a bit on the elaborate end. Let's see, trying, like, for example, to unlock I'm trying to remember, is it the Inquisitor? Like, not just after you find him, but you have to get the Inquisitor's mace and the Inquisitor's armor to recruit him. Which, it's like shock upon shock. This game also has a crafting element. Because what RPG, even remotely esque thing can get by without a crafting system these days. And as far as crafting systems go, it's okay. It's a pretty typical crafting system. You gather the items, you you put them together, you get better stuff. Fairly simple. Like another one of the classes, you have to kill 200 monsters for, and so on and so forth. Now, mind you, when you start off with basically the 3 most archetypical types. You've got your healer, you've got your ranger, rogue, basically, your ranged fighter, if that actually mattered in this game. Like, honestly, the kinds of weapons you attack with aren't all that important. There are some importances, like certain monsters are like vulnerable to swords or arrows or like holy spells, that kind of thing. Like, or they are strong against certain weapons and certain attacks, like they'll be resistant to flames. It's all pretty typical RPG stuff. But it's not bad at all. Anyway, it's like, and you've got your meat shield warrior, but he's not quite as meat shieldy as the first character class that you'll unlock in the game, and that's the defender. He's around at the beginning, but he goes off to do a quest, and he shows up like after you complete the first area of the game. Also worth noting that each area is split up into 2 areas. Like, there's a part 1 with a minion, and you have to go off and kill that, and then you go off and try to fight the sin of the area. And and let's see. In terms of like actual battle tactics and planning, like here's where I ran into problems with the game, because this game is describing itself as an RPG. I think it would be better to describe it as an RPG light. Like, you've got RPG stuff here, but it's like, you can equip like 1 weapon and 1 piece of armor. You've got like 5 levels of progression in terms of a skill tree, but like the skill tree will offer at most like 3. I think I saw 1 with 1 branch. Like the most is 3. And sometimes it's a passive skill set. Sometimes it's an active skill set. Sometimes it's just 1 attack. depending on the thing. And the other bit of it is attacks from outside of the basic stuff or defense procedures. It's like any sort of healing, any sort of buffs, debuffs, that sort of thing. They require a thing called rage points. Um, these are not like magic points. These are more like movement points, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, if you use the basic attack, you'll generate a rage point, and that'll allow you to use the second set of skills, for example. And of course, there are items that will provide you with, temporary or permanent boosts in terms of rage points, which can be helpful, which are helpful later on in the game when you start unlocking the higher end stuff. And that does bring me into another subtler problem with the game, but something that is not unexpected because this game kind of adheres to an older school of experience gaining. That is to say, if a character is in a party, they're not gaining experience. So, welcome to the age-old conundrum. It's like, is it worth putting this new character in my party to build up? Or is it worth just, sticking with what I got because, they're already level 2, they're already level 3. And for me, I tried like using the defender for a bit, and I was just like, you know what, I'm going to stick with the core cast here because you know what, he's already, it's like my warrior's already a level ahead, and this is, once again, tipping the flavor in terms of Western RPGs. Each level does feel significant. I will say in general, this is something I found that Western RPGs do make more of a point. Like each level is a significant advancement in terms of your power, defend, as opposed to, like Final Fantasy, when you got 99 levels, they're going to feel less significant. There's still progression. It's just doled out slower. Whereas like games like this, it's like when you reach level 2, you will feel the difference. Like you will see the earlier dungeons get much easier, for example. So, it is definitely worth, and it does take a bit of time to get to each level as well. Let me think here. In terms of audiovisual presentation, the graphics, they're okay. Like, this is, like I'd say the graphics are the closest in terms of like being an actual JRPG, as in this looks like a game from the Super NES, at least in terms of, I'd say, fidelity. In terms of art style, once again, this leans Western. For the most part, that isn't to say that JRPGs can't look like this. It's just, once again, I find more Western RPGs look like this game than, JRPGs. Nothing wrong with that. It's just my personal notations on the aesthetical style. Much more interesting is the music. Like, honestly, I really, really like the music. Probably because this is some of the most un-RPG-esque music I can think of. Like, the basic battle theme is this weird, otherworldly mouth harp, Gregorian chant thing. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I'm not gonna lie. I like I said, that's probably why I like the music in this game, because it's so, it's radically different from typical RPG music, but it's also something that I didn't feel was out of place. That's a really hard thing to nail. When you go off the beaten path, there's a danger that you may stumble into, like you just missed the point of why this is usually done this way. But thankfully in this instance, it's it worked out for them. granted, I think this is a subjective measure, so um, you personally may not enjoy the music as much as I did, but it is worth taking into account. Let's see. Other, there are as you'd expect, there are traps in this game, fairly frequent, and honestly, at a certain point, I worried about traps more than enemies, depending on the dungeon. You can dismantle them with a trap disarmament kit, but you have to find those in the dungeon. Honestly, those were surprisingly plentiful. Yeah. Another interesting facet of this game that I don't think quite worked was the how you unlock the skill tree. It's not just a matter of gaining levels, although you have to do that. The way you unlock the actual techniques or whatever is you have to get a stone of wisdom for like for each, it's like for the like, was it level 3 you had to get the small stone, level 4 it's the medium, and the 5th it's the large stone. So, it's like it's not that hard to get. You just buy it from the merchant, or you find them in the dungeons. But it didn't really feel like this was a necessary step to unlocking progression. Like, this is kind of what the drawing back to the music. This is kind of what I'm talking about. This is a something that other RPG and other RPG-esque games do. Skill trees are a fairly common skill system in today's age. But it's like when you unlock something, you unlock it, or the consideration isn't from unlocking a level of skills, it's putting your points into skills. That's something that's missing here. You just need a arbitrary object to unlock the entire skill tree. You're not putting points into one attack versus the another. It's like you're not putting points into, do I want more skill points or do I want more defense, stuff like that. These are the kind of deeper RPG considerations this game is missing. And really, that was my biggest problem with this game. It's just too shallow. You've only got like a certain amount of attacks, a certain amount of tactical considerations. This is something I will grant you that is endemic to RPGs in general. But when you cut stuff down to the bone, it becomes really, really noticeable that you only have access to 2 attacks until you access the 4th tier of skills. And it falls into another RPG trapped chestnut. That is to say, regular battles get very boring, very samey. And it's like the only real challenges are the bosses. And yes, those do provide a fair amount of challenge, but that's like one fight out of several hundred. And like I said, some of it is just that's how the RPG genre goes. But honestly, there just wasn't enough meat in the skill, in the skill systems, in the progression systems, in the attacks, for me to stay invested. Like the first time, until like the first time I died to the second sin. Like, I'm not sure if permadeath is a thing with this game, but honestly, I didn't endeavor to find out because by that point I was just bored with this game. And that's unfortunate because, on paper, this game is a fine endeavor. Doesn't really do anything wrong. It's just, this is the kind of problems when you strip down. It's the whole, this game is very accessible. It's very breezy, but it's also, very prone to repetition, very prone to becoming a dullard because there's not a lot to do, and that is unfortunate. Anyway, the game clocks in at $14.99, which is a good price for this kind of game. Also worth noting, even though the game is quote unquote content complete, or rather, it's got a 1.0 release. It's like I can't really call this content complete because, well, it's got a roadmap. Stuff that released this month is the NPC Goblin Trader and the Tower of Trials, which is your basic 100 floor challenge. Try to get through that many floors and survive. Coming up in the month of October, new region called Snow Peak, 2 new heroes, and additional languages are planned. Let's see, console-wide controls, difficulty. The Hell difficulty is coming in November, and Steam Workshop support in December. So there's quite a bit coming to this game in the next couple months. Will we do a further review of this game? I would say no, because the core is here. Like, I would say that the November stuff is what we would reevaluate over anything else, because honestly, most of this is just more stuff. Stuff like a new difficulty and console controls that actually affects how the way like the game is played and stuff. But I don't see it. Honestly, I'm just not interested in this game enough to warrant a re-examination, basically.
I guess to some extent it makes sense for indie games to release and then get more stuff done, just because time and amount of effort in it. It's always a tough balance on how much it makes the first release version look to the players.
Right. I mean, keep in mind that that's just the release version. To the shock is what should be to no one. This game spent about 2 years in early access.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, this game does consider itself released. It's not in early access, which is why we're reviewing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like overall it's a decent package, but it's like it's not. It's not going to be like Baldur's Gate 2. It's not going to be like Final Fantasy 7. You're not going to lose hundreds of hours in this game. That's got its positives. That's got its negatives. Personally, I'm the kind of person who looks for depth in their RPGs. This is the same problem I had with the previous RPG Light experience that we reviewed, Deep Sky Derelicts. Which was doing not the same stuff, but had the same kind of focus. Like, it was very down to the bones kind of mechanics. It's just, there are some games where I can play for, maybe not stripped down, but simple mechanics. And this wasn't one of them, mainly because, there's no real narrative driving this. There's no grand story that kept me interested. There's no interesting characters that caught my attention. And there are schools of thought on this. There are some people who think that's a good thing in terms of RPGs. These tend to be people who come from the pen and paper set. The people who can't fathom the thought that, oh no, Dragon Quest is an RPG. Or like Final Fantasy. That's a big one that gets them, because you're not playing a role, quote unquote. You're playing a character. But you
don't get to define your character.
Right. You define your character versus the creators of the game defining your character. It's like, and this has been an argument that's literally been raging for decades. It's got its merits. It's got its demerits. I say it depends on what game we're talking about. In this case, this game really could have used more seasoning. I or more meat if we're continuing the food analogy. Overall, I give it a 6 out of 10. Decent enough, but do keep in mind that everything here is a bit threadbare. All right. So that'll about do it for Sin Slayers here. Be sure to tune in after the break as Twilight Winter will be tackling a game called Death Crown.